Okay, recording to this computer. I do want to remind everybody to make sure that you always include your APA 7 references and in-text citations, even in discussions, because if you're presenting information from a source, you have to account for where it comes from. So some of you might very well lose some points for that, but it's not a lot of points. It's enough to get your attention, but not enough to seriously drop your grade unless you do it every single assignment, every single discussion for all 16 weeks. So with that said, some of you are doing outstanding, getting the APA 7 used properly, and I want to commend you, those that are doing good. And you'll see the feedback that I give on your assignments and discussions will reflect it. And my feedback is never designed to make you feel like I'm attacking you. That's never the intent. Rather, I'm trying to help you to become better as a student, as an academic writer, as a business professional, as a leader. So it comes from that place. So I hope that you accept it that way. Let me get our slides pulled up and we will get started with today's lecture. There we go. And bada boom. Share. And get that there. Go on, slideshow it. Okay, good. Check one thing before we get moving. Good. Looks good to me. All right, so this is week 8. That means come Sunday at midnight, you will officially be halfway done with this term. Congratulations for surviving. Keep up the good work. And I hate to say it, but it's the second half. I can't say it's more difficult than the first half. It is different. But the two topics unite together in a beautiful way. Whoever originally designed this course did a fantastic job. I've been teaching it for 2 years now, and I've always been very impressed with how it's composed. The first half of the course deals with psychological safety for teams. You know that. The second half is what we're starting today, and that is systems thinking. Let me get that door closed for a second. Hold on. I do talk loud. And so systems thinking, I'm going to give you an overview. We're going to discuss it, and we're going to start going through the material that's in your module. The textbook for this next 8 weeks is the book by Barry Oshry, Seeing Systems. It is a very good textbook. Now, I do want to point out that towards the end, we have, he takes an approach in dealing with systems where he looks at religion and he comes at it from the standpoint of an atheist slash agnostic. Just understand that's the author. I myself used to be a minister. I am an atheist. I'm an agnostic atheist, but I never try to push my viewpoints on anyone else. So this course is not set up to try to get you to change your beliefs. I never would do that. Hold on to your beliefs, whatever they may be. They're yours, they're precious, and I would fight to the death for you to be able to have your beliefs. So I preface it this way because we are going to be discussing, because in looking at how system thinking is applied, we see it around us in politics, we see it around us in the business environment, we see it around us in social media and in religions. That doesn't mean that the content of the religion isn't true. It means that sometimes people push their own ideologies along with it. And we have to be careful about that, if that makes any sense. So like you can have a televangelist using the Bible as his text, but he's also pushing his own dogma, his own beliefs or creed. And so just bear that in mind. We are looking at trying to separate out what somebody brings from themselves, what somebody brings from literature, from history, from business, from academia. There's a blend between them sometimes, and we need to be able to separate that out. And that's really part of what systems thinking is. It's a lot deeper than that. In a couple of weeks, we will actually be applying systems thinking, looking at Dracula. And I like to use Dracula because a lot of people think of the blood-sucking vampire in the movies. That is not the Dracula we're going to talk about. We're going to be learning about a little bit about Vlad Tepes III, the man that Dracula was based on. And we're not going to be looking at the lore, but we're going to be looking at the systems he was a part of and the different levels within those systems and how he was caught between two juxtaposing systems. He was literally sandwiched between them. And we're going to learn how to do our graphs using that history. So you're going to learn just a little bit of history. And I like to do that so that we're not picking at anything that actually is near and dear to someone's heart, such as religious beliefs or politics. I find that using a historical character is a much better approach. So with that preface done, let's get moving here. Introduction to systems thinking. Systems thinking is something that you already do to a degree. Oh, boy, thank you. I'm sorry about that, Peter. I'm glad you caught that. Literally, it should take me just flipping that switch on, and it should come up. Yes. Good catch. All right, so systems thinking is something you already do to a degree. It's literally about perspectives. Perspective is like a huge percentage of systems thinking. We use schemas to arrange things in our minds for future memory recall. A schema is a concept from psychology where we take in information and we file it in our memory system, in our brain. And the schema is kind of like the route that we put it into. The more that you recall that schema, the easier you're going to remember the content that's inside of it. Okay. So we use schemas to arrange things. And systems thinking applies also to mental models. Mental models ties in with schemas. It ties into perspectives. Mental models, as you're going to be learning today, literally, they help us to operate in the world around us. All right. And that's about as far as I'm going to go into that at this moment. But by the time we're done with today's lecture and, today and Wednesday's lectures, both of them combined, you'll have a much better understanding of these concepts. You have in the module some resources. There was a WBUR interview with McQuilkin and Chakrabarti. I apologize. I can't say some names very well, and I don't like to cause to say things wrong, but it happens. I apologize. They interviewed Zeynep Tufekci. They discussed how the COVID pandemic changed how we view the world. Yes, the COVID pandemic is a great way that we can, it's something we can use to understand systems thinking. Because literally we saw it play out literally in the news day by day. We saw the long-term effects of the Chinese government's attempts to cover up the pandemic's beginnings. There was, I'm trying to figure out what that word's supposed to be. I literally went through this. I did the slides based on the notes that I have together. And somehow I misspelled a word, and I'm trying to remember what it is. I think that's critical censorship, and I'm gonna have to correct
Is it
that.
supposed to say?
What was that, Bonnie?
I was going to say it's either critical or ethical.
I think it's critical because I was looking at it, and I think that's what critical censorship contradicts the psychological safety we discussed in the last few weeks. I think that makes the most sense there. And I will before I upload it tonight, I will go through and correct that. And we're going to find a couple mistakes in here. I apologize. My world, I'm getting ready for this move that I'm starting tomorrow. I got sick this weekend. My whole world went crazy the last few days, and I apologize. And I don't want my students being caught in the middle of that. But unfortunately, I do make mistakes. And thankfully, psychological safety has taught us that mistakes happen and that it's okay as long as we own up to them. So moving along, we got to be careful with the psychological safety. We're not going to release that. We're not going to give up on that. We want to maintain that as we now develop our ability to use systems thinking. The two relate together so beautifully and they work together so wonderfully. So let's retain everything we learned about psychological safety as we learn systems thinking. A system is comprised of at least 5 parts. You have 2 or more nodes. Now, nodes can also be called elements. They would be like individuals. They could be policies. They could be procedures. They could be teams. Anything that is within that system that in the view you are looking at is one of the smallest units of measure in that system. So if we're looking at organizational standard operating policies or procedures, we would use policies and procedures as being nodes. They would be the smallest element. If we're looking at the humans within an organization, then the people would be the smallest element or node. You have inflows, outflows, you got stock, and you have feedback loops. And by the time we're done with the next 8 weeks, you will understand each of these components of a system. You can think of inflows as being raw materials coming into the organization that they're going to need in order to be able to produce the products. The outflow is the actual product that's being made. And then, of course, the stock is the reservoir that the organization holds. And then the feedback loops, which I think is a very fascinating feature of a system. You can have a balancing feedback loop, or you can have a reinforcement feedback loop. And you're going to see how they can create a negative to become even more negative, or make a positive into even more positive. And so it depends the feedback loop that you use on how positive or negative you create that system to be. And once again, I know some of this stuff isn't going to really make sense right now because we got to go through all the little parts of it. And that's what we're going to do for the next 8 weeks. So this is just an overview. Okay, so here's an example. The Chinese government was the original source of information pertaining to the pandemic. This constitutes a node. In that system, the Chinese government was the node. The news reports began to spread. This is the inflows and the outflows. The news report comes in and then they disseminate it out. The Chinese government was the original source of this information. Like I said, why did that slide get double done? Okay, moving on. The pandemic, just like Tufekci said, we are using the pandemic as an example. We're not trying to make a claim. I know there was a lot of controversy during that time period. There were a lot of bits of misinformation. We're not dealing with that. We're just using it as an example of looking at what makes up a system. Tufekci pointed out that systems thinking is how interdependent, complex things interact over time. You're going to hear over time very, very often over the next several weeks. That's because what we're doing in understanding a system literally is looking at a thing, that's the node or that element, the interaction it has with other nodes and other elements, and it has to be over time. So there are several parts to what constitutes our quote unquote formula. Over time is essential because how else are we going to understand the interconnectedness if we don't have a time frame that we're looking at? When you did your case studies, you needed to have it bounded within time. Otherwise, you would have just an overflow of information and you wouldn't keep a clear, sharp scope and focus for your work. The same thing here. If we don't bound that system into time, then we don't have a starting and stopping point. Tufekci noted that normal academic fields tend to evaluate their subjects in a similar fashion. If you look at biology, if you look at chemistry, if you look at psychology, they look at their subjects almost in a very linear way. What systems thinking does is it breaks us from that linear thinking and it gets us looking at the non-linear aspects of that system. So linear is if A, then B, and then you have consequence C. If I do this and I make this decision right now, then I will have this consequence. It is literally linear. Unfortunately, life is not linear. Life is a series of variables affecting us at this moment of time. We make a decision impacted by all these variables. We could have a potential outcome that is one of many. Because if one variable is different in this moment, then that outcome will be different. So we have to learn, we prepare for the best possible outcome, and we prepare for the worst possible outcome that we can look and we can identify. This lets us be ready for that whole spectrum of outcomes. Because as much as we want to say we can predict what's going to happen, we can't. Because even if we think we can account for 100 variables impacting the decision now, believe you me, there's a whole lot more than 100 variables at play. And one person, even one team, is not going to be able to identify all of them. And those unknown variables will change the outcome over time. Meadows wrote in 2008, she defined systems thinking as a set of things, people, cells, molecules, or whatever, interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. This is true of organizations, teams within organizations, friendships, social groups, relationships, biological systems in a human's body. These are all different systems. Later in the book, Meadows refines that definition and says a system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. So a system must be producing some sort of result. It doesn't have to produce it at this moment, but it's working to produce it. And that's interconnected. If you'll notice, both those definitions discuss interconnectedness. That's what we do. In systems thinking, we evaluate the elements or the nodes. We use analysis, which is what most of academic research does. You look at an analytical, almost statistical way of breaking down that element. You use a microscope, so to say. But then what systems thinking does, it says that's good, but don't stop there. Step back and stop using analysis. Now use what's called synthesis and look at holistically at that system. Look at the big picture. This is where you begin to find how element A is interconnected to element B and element C, how the different nodes are linked together, how people are linked together, how policies actually have points where they connect that maybe you didn't recognize before. And we can't learn what those are using an analytical approach. We have to use synthesis. Meadows gives three components of a system. You've got elements, interconnectedness, and a function or purpose. This school is a system. There are elements. Remember, elements can also be called nodes. Each of the students and faculty members are elements in the system of Cleary University. Interconnectedness. We are interconnected. The staff is interconnected amongst itself. The students are interconnected amongst itself. And the staff and the students are interconnected between themselves. So we have interconnectedness. And there is a function, there is a purpose. And that is providing quality education so the students can complete their degree work and become successful in their professional careers. So Cleary University fulfills the definition of a system. Elements within a system are the easiest to identify. Okay? All you got to do is look at who is involved. What is involved? Are there people? Are there policies? Are there procedures? Now, interconnectedness, this is what binds all of the elements together. It's like the glue that holds that system together. Interconnectedness between humans is displayed through conversation, empathy, through communication, which I put that a little different because conversation is one form of talking. Communication kind of covers all of them. Conversation is almost, well, kind of basic. Where communication, you literally can communicate sets of, data points, data sets. You can communicate statistics. You can communicate, send policies through email. You can communicate entire books to people through email or hand them a copy of a book. So there's different levels to communication, and that's that interconnectedness. How many students actually hang out after hours? How many athletes go hang out after hours? Probably some. You probably got some friends. So you hang out with them from time to time. Just hanging out is a form of interconnectedness. If you're sitting there and you're chilling and you're playing some Xbox or whatever you're playing, you're just relaxing. That is interconnectedness. If you go out for taco nights on Tuesdays with your friends, that's a form of connectedness, interconnectedness. Now, the system's function or purpose, this can be the most difficult to identify, okay? Because you have to, in identifying the elements, you just got to find people, policies, procedures, the smallest thing you can break it down to. The interconnectedness, that's fairly simple to also find. How do those elements relate together? With policies, the interconnectedness would be the sections and subsections that actually cross over and either refer to another policy or tie into another policy. But that function or purpose, you've kind of got to break down and figure out, why are these people together? Why are these policies assembled in this SOP? You're figuring something out that's almost more existential. And any subsequent changes to a system's function or purpose can harm the system. You can remove elements out of a system. You can remove people out of a system, policies out of a system, procedures out of a system, and the system can still stand strong. But if you change its function or purpose, you existentially, at a very philosophical level, change its identity. And it changes everything about that system. It'd be like if Peter had to change his personality to a completely different personality. He would no longer be the Peter that we know. He would be somebody else. That's why there's some forms of traumatic brain injury where the person is a different human being afterward. Genetically, they're the same, but the essence of who they are at that very existential state has changed. The same is true for systems. If you change that function or its purpose, it's like changing the personality of that system. Meadows also noted that a system is often found to be connected to or a part of other systems. Okay, here's the example I'm going to use. We live on the planet Earth. The planet Earth is a system, but the planet Earth isn't the system because the planet Earth is also paired with the moon. So Earth and the moon, that's a system. But Earth and the moon are part of the solar system, and that is a system. But the solar system isn't the system because now our solar system is part of a galaxy. And the galaxy is one of trillions of galaxies in the universe. And scientists think that our universe could be one of trillions of universes. They haven't proven that yet, but it is a theory that so far has not been disproven. Where does the system end? I think that the only thing we can do, we stop counting systems when we no longer can factually prove that something is greater than that system. So since I cannot prove that there is a multiverse, I stop my system at the universe. Now, that's kind of on the extreme, because if you're dealing with IBM and you're looking at systems in IBM, you can deal with the human resources department as a system. and you can work out all your graphs and all your understanding, great. But then you may have to look at how that system or components in that system, elements, are connected to other systems. How do they connect to the research and development system? How do they relate within the larger system of IBM? And that is something you're going to see when we're talking about Vlad Tepes III, Dracula. He had a system. He was king of a system, his kingdom. But he was part of the Holy Roman Empire. But yet he was also connected to the Ottoman Empire. He was sandwiched between these two systems, yet he governed a system. So in the system he governed, he was the leader. In the other systems, he was not the leader. He was a leader. So he was nothing more than an element in the Holy Roman Empire. But yet in his kingdom, he was the leader of of that system. So if we're looking at a team, your team leader could be the leader of the team. So that system, the leader is in charge of it. But when we step back and use synthesis, now we realize that leader is one of hundreds of leaders in the organization. That leader suddenly stops being a leader, or as Barry Oshry calls them, a top, and he becomes a middle or a bottom. A bottom is somebody that is just the basic level element. A middle is somebody that is of higher stature in that system, more responsibility, but not at the top. That's saved for the tops, the senior leaders. So in the organization of Cleary University, in this classroom, I am a top. But in stepping back, in the academic department, I'm a middle. But when we step back further and we consider the athletic department and the Lions building over there and all components of Cleary University, I become a bottom. So a leader in one system becomes just a basic element in another system. Okay? I think I've explained that good enough, but we will be learning a lot about this, so you'll be getting many more chances to go deeper into this. Meadows noted that a system is often found to be connected to or part of other systems. Boy, I did some repeating. Where was my head? Anyway, systems thinking allows for unique solutions to complex issues. When I say a complex issue, I don't mean that in a colloquial way. Like, oh, this is a difficult issue. This is a complex issue. No, I mean that there's a complexity to it, that there are so many variables, so many factors that it is complicated even to consider all of them. Because you see, systems thinking is actually a subset of systems theory. It's applied systems theory in action. Systems theory falls under complexity theory, which is tied to many different systems or academic fields out there, including network theory, graph theory, nonlinear dynamical systems theory, which is known as chaos theory, which, by the way, affects organizations and leadership in a very profound way. Evolutionary biology, because we got to learn about how things can emerge from a system if the right variables are put into it, where a system can innovate, but that's through a process of accepting chaos, allowing for creativity to occur in a psychologically safe environment, leading to the innovation that emerges, a new policy, procedure, product, or new perspective that we couldn't account for before. There are bifurcations that occur. A system is going along through life and it hits a bifurcation. That's a chaos moment. A bifurcation means a split. You have a choice. You can go left, you can go right. Depending on what you choose will dictate your future consequences or outcomes. And there's a ratio known as the Feigenbaum constant that explains that ratio between this bifurcation moment and this bifurcation moment. And this bifurcation, and they become quicker and quicker and quicker. The longer an OR system is in place, the more that change happens, and it happens more rapidly. But that ratio of change is always consistent.
It's called the Feigenbaum constant. Whether it is a far distant pulsar emitting radiation, whether it's a dripping faucet of water in your kitchen, whether it's things going on in your friendships or relationships, things dealing with your homework, it breaks down to that ratio between chaotic events is always the same. And I want to say, what is it, 4.6692 something? I have to look it up. It's an infinite number, but it always is in that ratio. So as a leader, we can almost predict the time frame that a chaotic event will occur in our team or organization. We can't predict exactly when, but we can tell, okay, the ratio, it's been picking up speed. And before it was 2 months, the next time it happened, it was a month and a half. Now we're down to just about a month. So the next change that's going to happen will probably be within the next 2 weeks. So it gives leaders an advantage in predicting change and dealing with change. So the nodes, they interact with one another in complex and different ways. That complex and different ways, that is interconnectedness. And you can't understand it if you don't know everything you can about the element, about the node, the person, the policy, and step back and look to see how it's interconnected to other elements in that system. That's the only way you can begin to really understand how this complexity begins to manifest. Many components interact simultaneously and in a manner that traditional academic fields are not ready to consider. Side note, my specialty is in management, specifically leadership and organizational strategy. My second specialty is in theological studies, but that just helps me with understanding culture in organizations. But when we look at the management side of my specialization, there are people that think that systems thinking doesn't have a place in business. Yet Forbes magazine in June, was it May or June of this year, listed systems thinking as a desirable trait that employers look for in their new hires. Indeed.com, LinkedIn, all tout systems thinking as essential soft, that's a hard sentence to say, an essential soft skill for employees to have. And so while we're talking about it, please don't think, yes, it does relate to physics, but the way I'm going to try to present it to you over the next 8 weeks is not in a way that makes sense to a physicist, but in a way that makes sense to a business leader. Okay? So I'm not just wanting you to know the theory or how to describe systems thinking. I want you to know how to just use it. Okay? It'll help you to see the world around you as a leader more clearly, to understand how consequences seem to just pop up out of nowhere. Have you ever had something happen in your life that felt like a consequence and you don't know where it came from? It's because 10 years ago you made a decision and it took 10 years for that consequence to mature enough to actually become present. When we're children, we learn to ride a bike, a lot of us at least. And if you make a mistake riding a bicycle, you have immediate feedback. That loop is immediate. You mess up, you fall, you scuff your knee, bang your head, you know it. The consequence happens instantly. Many parts of human existence, the consequence is delayed. That means, or the action that leads to that consequence happens at this point in time, but the consequence may take days, weeks, months, years to manifest. And we're sitting there going, why is my world completely upside down? And if you break it down, you can find the point of time where you made a decision that led to this consequence. And as a leader, you need to understand this when you enter into decision making. So it is essential. It's also kind of fun, in my opinion. All right. Feedback loops. This is an unpredictable, okay, i.e. feedback loops. The I disappeared. An unpredictable avalanche of outcomes. Okay, so feedback loops A lot of academic fields don't necessarily consider feedback loops in their totality. And when this happens, outcomes, plural, tend to build up, and it's like a dam breaking, and all this water gushes out. All these consequences begin just flooding throughout the system. This is kind of how, when a company begins to go completely downhill, like Enron, Blockbuster, whatever, you can name any of them, you can go back in time and find a point of time where all of these actions and decisions were made, but the consequence was delayed, and it built up, and suddenly the avalanche releases and the company goes under. Tufekci pointed out that systems thinking allows one to evaluate multiple aspects or dynamics as they occur in the real world instead of a sterile and controlled laboratory environment. We as leaders are not in a laboratory setting. I'm a researcher, but I am not in a laboratory setting. When I typically conduct research, I'm actually around people in their natural habitat. So I have to be able to account for variables that I could actually remove from that scenario in a sterile situation, in a laboratory situation. But if I'm out and about in the actual system I'm studying, I can't remove them. Systems thinking helps us to identify these aspects, these variables, and account for them. The real world is extremely complex, and there's so many variables, nodes, and outcomes that it's difficult to keep track of them all. If one could, we could actually probably predict our own future exactly and perfectly if we could track and account for every single factor and variable impacting us at every single moment in time. But because we can't do that, our future seems unclear. But we can learn to make better decisions so we begin to get the outcomes that we want, the beneficial consequences. The author noted that anyone could apply systems thinking without being a researcher. My son, 19 years old, 20 years old, I forget, I think he's going to be 20 this year. He can apply systems thinking. And as a matter of fact, he does in some ways, because we all do it already. When we look at things in a non-linear way, we are applying systems thinking. In fact, he noted that this is knowledge creation without being the researcher. This allows for many components to be considered. I really would like to know what I got to go through this. I am so sorry. I've been so busy in my world. I thought that this was correct, and this sentence is not. Okay, this is knowledge creation without having to be a researcher. It allows for many of the factors and elements in that system to be not just considered, but understood. It requires that the person is able to get outside of their own comfort zone. We like to cling to the status quo. Timothy Clark taught us that. But when we release ourselves from that status quo, when we challenge that status quo, we are left with a feeling of uncertainty. Typically, we want to go back to that status quo because it made us feel safe. That's the wrong approach. What we need to do is learn to accept the chaos of that moment and let something emerge, something that's innovative, a new policy, procedure, approach, perspective, idea, thought. It will allow for new things to happen. Yet we have control over what they are. Because if we put the right things in, we get the outcome we want. If you're writing computer code, you put in the right code, you're going to have a finished product that does what you want. Well, using systems thinking is similar. By learning how to use it in decision making, you can actually tailor your decisions so that you get the results you're hoping for, at least in part. A higher percentage of success is going to lead to you being able to have the future you want. And you've got to be able to select what variables, what factors affect that decision in the moment. This requires intellectual humility because we don't know the future, but we can work with this systems approach to understand the pressures of the moment to make a better decision so we have a better future. This is the basic framework of decision making. Now, there's an example of policy making that was used by the authors or by Tufekci, and it demonstrates how a policymaker, they need to consider developing a policy because it's going to impact numerous individuals residing inside multiple spheres. What's a sphere? A sphere is kind of a Platonic idea. This class is a sphere. Okay? We are within that sphere of the class, but you're also in other classes which are themselves in spheres. See, a sphere is a type of system, isn't it? And all these spheres, all these classes you're a part of are part of Cleary University, which is the larger system. So policies here at Cleary have got to consider how that policy is going to affect everybody in all the various spheres. So if there's a policy change to the late policy, let's say, it's got to be considered how what has to be considered is how is it going to impact students in the freshman, sophomore, and junior and senior levels? How's it going to affect the graduate students? Is it going to benefit one group and harm another group? So you have to stop, you look at what you can identify, you analyze it, step back, look at the bigger picture, and try to project the outcome you want to achieve, and then you've got to map out a way there. Lawmakers, regardless of political affiliation, they did not consider the multitude of variables that were involved in the pandemic's beginning. And they just went in creating policies, and they were inefficient because there was a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, this is happening. A knee-jerk reaction, we need an instant fix. When what they should have done is take a quick moment, evaluate things using analysis, step back, see how everything relates together, and look, how is this change, this new law, this new policy? What is the long-term effects of it over time? And they wouldn't have to take very long to do this. It literally can be done fairly quickly. It caused immeasurable harm. Thousands of people a day dying because of ineffective policies, because they didn't take the time to consider how it was going to impact all these different spheres, all these different systems of human beings. Now, systems thinking can also help avoid assigning blame to innocent parties. Because in systems thinking, you trace down the connections, the interconnectedness. So this person did this person responded like this, it caused this outcome. Now we can see and trace it back. The outcome wasn't because of this person over here. It was because of the originator of that plan of action, that course, that policy. It may not be the person you originally thought would be to blame. And so if you want to assign blame, you have to make sure it goes back to the right person. You can't do that if you don't know how everyone is interconnected. Because Peter and I may be connected, but Vios and I aren't. But Vios and Peter are connected. So now I can actually impact Vios by impacting Peter. So someone might say, yeah, well, Brian, you couldn't affect Peter, you couldn't affect Vios. You can be the blame. But if I did something that changed the way you dealt with Vios, then I was to blame, even though I wasn't directly connected with Vios. This also helps correct the problem. Instead of just assigning blame across the board, using systems thinking, you can trace down the origins of the problem. In this example, somebody could trace down and say, oh, Professor G, Dr. G was the source of the problem in Vios's world. But just somebody looking linearly wouldn't see that because it wasn't a linear progression. It was nonlinear. Because Vios and I aren't connected, but Peter and I are. We can make it even more realistic and put a couple more steps between you and me and have the chain go that way. So you've got to be able, the interconnectedness, you could actually graph this stuff out too. It's not the easiest thing to do, only because of the time that goes into it. I actually have, and I'll show this in a later week. I love the TV show MASH. And I took one of the episodes and I did a systems thinking graph of it. People that you may not consider being connected, suddenly you could see how they were totally connected. It's amazing. And I'll show you the basics of doing graphing like that. This can also help prevent the spreading of false information. We saw with the pandemic, false information is dangerous. And as we're going to learn, social media is a way that false information travels unchecked. There's no checks and balances in social media to weed out the lies, no matter what they are. So it's left to each individual to test the veracity of a claim. Most people aren't going to take the time it takes to check everything they hear online. Now they just start believing it. Personally, if I hear something and it doesn't mesh with what I know reality to be, I look into it and I try to identify where it came from. I look at the path of people it went through. I look at who these people are connected to. And it's surprising because you can take something that seems just very benign and non-problematic, and suddenly by mapping out who all is connected, you see that the Ku Klux Klan might be involved. Hell's Angels could be involved. And you're like, wait a minute, how did they get into this mix? And why am I believing stuff that comes from them? So this is part of the verification of information. So systems thinking helps us to identify the various components within a system. If you're looking at the system of this class, the structure is pretty plain and clear. But I guarantee you there are some components, some elements to this system, this one system, this class, that you may not have considered. Anybody here know a man called Paul Morsink, Dr. Paul Morsink? He is a vital part of the system of this class. He did not create this class, but he is our current curriculum designer. So he goes through and reviews everything. So any changes that occur go through him. What about the original professor that designed the course? He worked with a different curriculum designer because Paul's only been here about a year and a half. Those people are still part of the system of this class because they had something to do with the development of this system. What about the authors themselves? Barry Oshry, Timothy Clark, Amy Edmonton, Meadows. They're part of the system too. Now they're more peripheral, but what they gave we're using as textbook material, which means while they look like they're peripheral, that they're minor, they're not. They're super important. And suddenly on the graph, the icon depicting them goes from being tiny to being large because of their importance level. Let's think about someone else. What about the IT department? What about Canvas itself and their IT team? Now, what about truck drivers working for one particular company that delivers products to the store you bought your computer at? He would then be part of this system if we really wanted to be very technical about it. So something that affects his life could end up affecting your performance in this class. If you're going to replace your computer and he has an accident that day, or his wife gives birth and he's at the hospital instead of driving, you can't get the computer, you can't get your assignment turned in on time. So all these little elements begin to become visible. What about the staff working over at the cafeteria? Do they affect this class at all? Who eats over there? I eat over there once a week. Who eats over there more often? All right, Peter. If they weren't there doing their job efficiently, you wouldn't have the nutrition for your brain to work properly. Did you know what organ in your body uses the most glucose? Your brain.
But I feel like if I didn't have to eat from them, like and I had my own food, I still would.
You could, but then we put another person in there.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is how systems start looking. We start looking at a system. It seems really simple. Suddenly, we're all the way over to HEB and Walmart. And we're sitting there going, how did we get all the way over here? Because when you start following that interconnectedness at every level, it becomes complex. Just like the human body. And it's very appropriate that we use systems thinking in business, because did you not realize, but the way we set up businesses and organizations is like almost very much like our human body. You got senior leadership, that's the nervous system, the brain, central nervous system. You have middle management, that's the peripheral nerves. You have frontline supervisors, that's the nerve endings, the sensors. You have the staff and employees, those are the cells in the different organs. The different organs are different departments. All of it works together into one system. But even that system is part of another system, which is part of another system. So part of systems thinking is knowing when to stop digging. So we got to know what the problem is that we are addressing. If we are addressing something that is curriculum related in this system of our class, we're not going to involve anybody that brings us nutrition. We cut those people out because we don't need to account for them. But if we're talking about the ability to function with our nervous system, we got to then look at the nutritional intake. Now we got to consider the cafeteria, Walmart, the stores. So it depends on what the purpose of that system will help you identify the elements within that system. Now, groupthink needs to be avoided, and you can avoid it by using systems thinking. You got a question, Peter? Oh, groupthink can be subverted by doing the work required to engage in systems thinking. Groupthink is we suddenly start just saying the same thing to kind of all get along. It's a form of consensus. The bad thing about groupthink is we don't have any actual feedback. There's no feedback loops. So Bios isn't giving me feedback. Bonnie's not giving me feedback. I'm not giving Crystal feedback. We lose that vital element, that vital component, because now we're just relying on groupthink. We develop an echo chamber. Now we all start saying the same things. We start making the same decisions. We're no longer going to be viable. Systems thinking allows us to identify these issues by saying, how is the feedback between Bonnie and Dr. G affecting Corey Goldsmith and Jacob Sutton's connection? Their interconnection. Is there an effect on that? We look at things from a different perspective. I said that systems thinking is all about perspective. It is. And we can avoid groupthink if we engage in the work required to think in a systems thinking manner. Leadership styles are essentially a form of using systems thinking. I really am sorry. I'm realizing my sentences, and I went through this. This is one of those things right here where honestly, I made a mistake. I'm owning up to it. But this is an example of how somebody in leadership can suddenly have tons of things that were going on in their life and it affects other things. This is also a form of systems thinking. The system that is Dr. G is dealing with having this cold, getting this move accomplished, dealing with a rowdy upstairs neighbor, dealing with having to keep working, which is fine. I like working, but that means I need to prepare presentations, do grading, do replies, and I'm still exercising and trying to lose weight. I'm down to 206 as of this morning. I'm real happy about that. But all of this together means that I lost track of some components in there. So these errors, of which there are a lot, can be traced back to this weekend when I was working on this. Everything else I was trying to do, I was trying to pack for the move. I was trying to do grocery shopping. I was trying to do everything at the same time and it wasn't working. Things fell apart. That system crumbled during that time. Now there is an effect because of interconnectedness. The problem in my little system of me affects the system of this class because these slides have got errors in them. So now I'm trying to correct them as we go, but I got to make sure that you realize this is also systems thinking at play. Because the effect it's having on you didn't start right now. It started Friday. Technically, it started a week and a half, 3 weeks ago with my rowdy upstairs neighbor. But this is the long-term consequences. How did I know 3 weeks ago when she was doing all that crazy crap up there that my class would be impacted like this? I didn't realize it. Now, if I broke it down, I could have found it as being a potential outcome. But I couldn't say this is going to happen, but I could have at least prepared for it. Then I would have maybe spent time double checking. I went through this with Grammarly, and I still have all these problems. This is one of those things where there's a long-term consequence that couldn't be accounted for upfront. We have them all the time. They happen to us. It's called life. So Tefekti noted that authoritarian leadership in China created the issues that caused problems in understanding the facts about the pandemic. This happened at the very beginning. The authoritarian government in China said, no, you're not going to put this out in the news. No, we're going to seal this information up. We're not going to share with the world. It allowed for the spread of COVID to happen. It seemed like super quick out of nowhere. But when you factor in the control from the authoritarian government suppressing the news coming out of China, it makes sense. Now it seems like a quick spread. In reality, it spread just as fast as any other pandemic. But because we couldn't get the news of it as it was happening at the beginning, it just seemed like it popped out of nowhere. There's a broad range of skills that can develop systems thinking. We need to find what they are in our academic life and in our life skills, our daily skills of living. What do we use to cope when there are problems with our neighbors? How do we cope? How do we handle that stress? Did I handle it correctly? I don't think I did. Because if I did, I think I would have had less mistakes in this PowerPoint. Because I have all these mistakes in here, I'm sitting here going, I did not handle that stressful situation correctly. The takeaway for me is try to handle the moment when it occurs, try to handle things in a better manner. Because 3 weeks down the road, I will have a consequence from it. So think about systems thinking in this way. It can contain deep study and topics. We can go really deep into it, as you've seen, or we can be surface level. I say if we stay to time, opportunity, and method, it will help us learn and apply systems thinking. What are the time frames that this system is bound within? Opportunity and method. What opportunities do I have to understand the elements of that system? How much can I truly know about the elements? And method. How am I getting the information? Am I just observing? Am I hearing words that I'm getting from people? Am I seeing data sets? The more you can actually get factual information, the better you can understand a system. The pandemic, if we had the facts up front when it first occurred, we could have avoided a global pandemic. But because that information was suppressed by an authoritarian regime, we were not able to do so. Now, there were other missteps along the way with other governments and institutions. We live in a globalized environment. What happens across the world affects us over here now. There was a time when that effect wasn't so obvious. But we live in a globalized economy, in a world where literally news spreads within seconds. If a volcano erupted right now on the other side of the planet, we would know about it within seconds. There was a time it would take years, decades for that information to arrive. We also, unfortunately, there are AI deepfakes. So somebody could put a volcano erupting, and if you convince enough people through the deepfake, the AI generated deepfake, you can make them think a volcano just tore apart an island on the other side of the world when it didn't. Misinformation. That impacts multiple systems along the way. It actually can destroy people within systems. It can lead to panic. People ran to the stores and bought toilet paper like they were going. Makes no sense. Do you know why they did that? Psychologically, it was a method of control. They felt like they lost control out of their life. But making sure they had toilet paper was a way that they felt they could retain that control. Unfortunately, those that weren't panicking about it still had to wind up going and try to scrounge around at stores all over the place just trying to find toilet paper because everyone else panicked and bought it all up. If we had just stayed like normal, we would have been fine. There would have been plenty on the shelves. When marginalized identities, such as gender, ethnicity, etc., are not fully considered, authoritarianism becomes possible. We have to, when we're looking at a system, we've got to understand this system is comprised of people from these multiple ethnic backgrounds, of these multiple religious viewpoints, of these multiple political viewpoints. And that's okay. We don't want a totally homogenized system, meaning everybody's exactly identical. We need this differentiation that comes from diversity. And systems thinking can help mitigate authoritarianism because we can identify the positive side of the interaction between the elements, people, based on the fact that they're from different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different age groups, different genders. We bring in a fresh batch of perspectives into that system. We need to welcome all these different viewpoints. And when we do that, we actually reduce the probability of authoritarian leaders getting their way. And systems thinking can help with this. In fact, he noted that systems thinking is beneficial in understanding the potential paths that a system could eventually take. This class is on a path. Part of it we know. It's 16 weeks long. It's time bound. But if we look at the real paths, BIOS, maybe you start a company based off of this class and learning about something about innovation or learning some skill. You could become a millionaire. Your kids then could benefit because now they not only get to attend school, but you help them start their own businesses. So something in this class could actually benefit multiple people that aren't even in this room. Peter might become a leader at an organization. And because he's really learned about leadership and learned about empathy, he becomes a humble-hearted servant leader who's effective. And other people are inspired by him to be similar to him. They treat their families better. They treat their systems better because of Peter and because he was here. And I'm teaching this not because I came up with it. It's not my idea. I'm just a middleman. I'm just somewhere in the middle. I'm just one of the parts of the course of the interconnectedness of this, and I'm happy to be there. Maybe you'll get the benefit from it. That's fine. Now, a middle approach can be found by evaluating these potential paths. I mentioned before about you find the best possible outcome and the worst possible outcome that could come out of the situation you're now in. You base that off of all the factors pressing upon you at this moment. Now we can project a range of possibilities. I did this when I was a sergeant in the Army. We would plan for war, but what was it? No, pray for war, prepare for, pray for peace, prepare for war. I got to get it right. We wanted peace, but we always trained for war. Not because we wanted it. We didn't want it. But you prepare for the worst case scenario, hoping to achieve the best case scenario. Because then everything in between there, you've got covered. The only way you can do that is if you can somehow kind of predict the upper and lower limits to that future spectrum. And you can do that now by looking at what are the factors that are affecting you. Now, I said you're not going to get them all, but if you can learn to find the major factors, you can account for most of the development of that long-term consequence. There will still be parts you won't have accounted for, but those are minor points. So, if you want to pass a course with an A, you would have to consider that all the assignments as elements. You have to look to see how they connect together, how it's an iterative process, step by step. You've got to see how you've got a part to play in there. Put the effort in, combined with seeing how it's all related together. And starting from week 1, looking for the most important content in the material that week. Week 2, find the most important content. Draw a line between them, and you can actually predict, I will be able to understand this material, or maybe I need to do a lot more studying so I can understand it. But you'll be able to predict how you're ultimately going to do in a class. Now, that's a simplified example, but that's basically what you're working on. Or you could look at your grades each week. You could follow and see what are your grades for this discussion, this assignment, that assignment. Is there a trend? If I'm trending at just getting B's, what is the feedback I'm getting that can help me? So maybe if I apply that feedback, I can now trend getting A's, which would give you ultimately a higher grade. But it takes effort. You have to actively be looking. Once again, when you're looking at the smallest factors in there, in this example, it'd be the assignments. You have to analyze them. But in seeing how all these assignments link together, you got to step back and look holistically. So now we're going to turn to the influential podcast. They did a good talk with Peter Singhi. Now, Peter Singhi is like an idol of mine, and he's a very intelligent individual. Our class is done in 15 minutes, right? Yeah, we end at 4:15. Okay, good. So the video presenter states that Singhi is a leader in the academic study of leadership and knowledge management. This is true. He also has done a lot dealing with systems thinking. He wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline. Excellent book. It is available in Audible. I recommend at least giving it a listen. Singhi is a senior lecturer at MIT, the Sloan School of Management. He mentions in this interview how he tends to be skeptical when individuals seek to appear a certain way. Okay. Have you ever seen a content creator on TikTok, on YouTube, whatever, and they've got the fancy car, they've got all the rings, they got the right clothes, their hair's done perfect, they're in front of a mansion? They're presenting you an image. Most of the time, it's a false image, because if you really looked at their life, They don't live in that mansion. That's not their car. Somebody else did their hair for them. They're having to spend most of the money that they're earning on a team of people to make it look like they've got a better life than they do. That is a study called pulchronomics. And it's a study or inquiry into how one's physical attractiveness can drive their economical situation, their financial status. If I look successful, people are going to treat me like I'm successful. Now, while there's a good side to pulchronomics, it's what keeps us from walking into an interview at a wonderful job looking like a bum. There's a bad side when people are misleading others to think in order to have a good life, I must have what this person has. If I don't got a fancy car, if I don't have name brand eyewear, if I don't have a mansion, then I'm not successful. That's a problem. Now, social media has created a huge issue with this. This ties right into systems thinking. Just give me one moment. Singh noted that the central problem surrounding this false image is that facts no longer matter in social media. People aren't concerned about facts. They're going by just what does it make me feel at this moment. They become hedonistic, but on a very temporary basis. Yes, permanently they act hedonistically, but in the moment they're seeking a feeling at that moment. It's like an addict. They're always seeking the next fix. Singh, he stated that appearance replaces substance. I would rather watch YouTube, which I do from time to time, but I want somebody who's going to give me factual information that I can actually go verify. I love that. I love documentaries. I love history. I love factual stuff. But if someone's going to sit there and just spout stuff off and not give the sources they got it from, I don't trust it because I want to be able to verify. So content like this doesn't have any substantive depth. And Singh pointed out that this creates a form of social delusion regarding truth and facts. We saw this happen with the pandemic. People didn't know what to believe. There were some strange things going on trying to defeat that pandemic. We needed to stick with facts. Now, this delusion directly impacts politics. Singh noted that social media is responsible for the shift. Hello, Jacob?
Jesus, that's you ignore the Zoom meeting I'm in. Woo.
Can you turn your microphone off?
It doesn't seem that bad for like two people. I could.
Don't worry, I muted you. Singh noted that social media is responsible for the shift away from facts having meaning, having social meaning. He pointed out that the age of enlightenment led to an understanding that reality is consensus-based. We understand what reality is because we all are experiencing something we can relate to and we come up with a consensus. However, my version of reality is different from yours because my vision, my actual vision is different than Peter's. So I literally will see things a little differently. My experiences in the past, my knowledge base may be different than yours. So I understand situations differently than you. I'm not better than you. Not right, not wrong, just different. So this is kind of the basis of the academic peer review. You want more people looking at something to get their perspective on it, to make sure that you're grounded in fact. Singh noted that due to the laissez-faire attitude that social media has brought into the social norm, that there's been an impact on education. This laissez-faire approach to social media has impacted how we look at truth. Singh noted, he discussed that organizational learning, this involves each individual's perspectives and the ability to seek out the truth. Everything I say, I want it to be truthful. You can take up a phone and you can actually Google everything I say, and you're going to find a source for it. I provide references and citations in my actual notes because I want you to know it's based on truth that you can look up. You can fact check me. Two dimensions of learning, they include learning new and necessary skills. That's kind of like walking and talking, and also perception over time. So you got new and necessary skills, and then what do you perceive over time? These are ways that we learn. The second dimension is what social media affects, and that is that perception over time. I told you you're going to hear over time quite often, because over time is one of the very foundational things with systems thinking and with understanding our perceptions of the world around us. Singhi noted that today's world is very complex, and as a species, we do not necessarily understand or comprehend the totality of the complexity. I've got a wall of degrees. The more knowledge I got, the more degrees I accumulated, the more I became confident I don't know everything. I don't. The more I've learned, the more I realize I don't know. And it helped me to be humble, and I'm glad for that. Did you know that we're going back to Pulchronomics for a second? Girls between the ages of, what was it, 11 and 23 or 13 and 23, that one right there, that demographic. Females, female humans between early teens and early 20s have an increased rate of depression. Researchers have found that there is a direct link between that increased rate of depression and social media. I told you about the content creators that put on a facade. Unfortunately, young human beings, males and females, but specifically females for some reason, I think it has to deal more with the psychological makeup and the way the brain is structured, also the physiological and the psychological aspects. It impacts them, it affects them more harshly. My ex-girlfriend was younger than me. She was always super depressed because she couldn't be like the content creators she watched. I said, it's all just fake. She goes, I know. But even though she knew that, she still felt because she wasn't able to look like that person or have what that person had, that she was a failure. She carried it everywhere she went. I watched that depression happen live in time, right there, live in concert. The solution is we need to be able to trust what we see, at least to some degree. We go and watch a movie about the Transformers, we know that robots like that don't exist. We suspend our belief. But yet we go onto YouTube and we're fed all these lies from these content creators putting on this show. We got to learn to suspend our belief and realize it's all fake. But I don't think we're going to achieve that. This lack of understanding how to properly perceive this social media, this content creation is going to affect humanity for generations. The pandemic is going to affect humanity for generations because many kids had to go to school wearing masks. Great. I was fine with masks. Not a problem. I was fine with the shots. I'm fine with all that. My thing is all these kids growing up in the very formative state of their development, the young years, not seeing people's expressions. I wonder what long-term effects are going to come from that. We won't know for about another 5-6 years. We'll start seeing it, the reports coming out then. But what happens now in social media is not just fun and games. It literally is changing the social norms, the fabric of reality, and the future. So we need to understand a way of identifying all these different parts of these different systems and how social media acts like a medium that these elements communicate through. And we got to understand how to sort out the true from the false. We got to understand how to do that, because if not, we're not going to be able to avoid the negative consequences that are en route for us. Systems thinking offers this. It gives us a new way to combat the fad of technology, the fad of the technology of social media, of being online. I think online, the internet, social media, there's a very positive side to it. there's a very negative side, just like everything on this planet. It'll have a positive side and a negative side. And we're going to end on this. We've got to develop ways of acquiring habits, skills, to sift out the information, to sift out the elements, to sift out the purposes of systems, to sift out the way they're structured, to understand the long-term impact it's going to have. Because if we don't do this, in 15 years, who knows where we'll be? Now, this does affect businesses because businesses are part of this. They can develop, they can learn to prepare for these consequences. They can try to bring about positive consequences through the development of additions to technology, changes, renovations, being able to scale back some of the depression that's being caused by social media. Or they can just let it run its course and go rampant. So we're going to end there. That's a little bit more of a sociological standpoint. I don't like ending there, but time-wise, we need to. We will be picking back up, and hopefully your professor will go through this and fix all these errors again. And I apologize. My world being upside down is the reason it's here that these mistakes occurred, but it's not an excuse. I don't believe in giving excuses. I will give you a reason, but not an excuse. On that note, I bid each of you a good night. We will have class on Zoom on Wednesday. I will be the one with no hair and half asleep. All right, you all have a good day, and email me if you have any questions from today's lecture. It kind of went longer than I like to, but I still ended before our expiration.
Have a good one.
Bonnie, you take care.
So I'm not sure if I'm gonna make it Wednesday. We traveling to Madonna. We have a game.
Okay. No problem. Just if you don't mind, Wednesday, shoot me an email to remind me Wednesday. Because with the week I'm having, I don't trust myself with notes or anything at the moment because I'll lose them.
All good, man. I'll shoot you a text.
Page 26. Yeah, if you send me a text, an email, whatever, I will gladly mark that down. And see you all later. Bye, Jacob. Bye, Metapause.